I'm James Lee Hernandez.
And I'm Brian Lazarte.
You're listening to Cinepod,
the cinematography podcast.
Bam.
The following podcast contains explicit language. You're listening to the Cinematography Podcast presented by Hot Rod Cameras, a program about the art, craft, and philosophy of the moving image and the people who make it happen. Coming to you from the world headquarters of Hot Rod Cameras in Hollywood, California, are your hosts, Ben Rock and Ilya Friedman.
Hey Ilya.
Oh, jinx.
How's it going?
It's going pretty well. It's another exciting episode of the Cinematography Podcast.
Who do we have on?
We have the creative team behind The Big Con, and you interviewed them. Who are they?
It's James Lee Hernandez and Brian Lazarte. You'd interviewed them a couple of years ago for McMillions, the documentary series that ran on HBO. And I was interviewing them, as you said, for The Big Con, which is on Apple TV Plus, currently streaming. Really cool documentary series. These guys have a real touch for finding a real life story that almost feels like a Coen Brothers movie.
You know, I did interview them, but that was pre-pandemic. And so basically, since shaving my head and getting a mohawk and carrying a trident everywhere and, you know, being wearing war paint and, you know, that's like another life. I don't even remember those days.
I just go for the baseball bat with a couple of nails through it. Escape
real
from
simple.
New York style.
Yeah, Escape from New York, of course, yeah. Not Walking Dead style. Not Lucille. No.
For sure.
Yeah, because that was like barbed wire, not nails. Yeah, someone would correct me if I. Yeah.
So anyway, we'll get into the interview. We never really set out when we started this to talk to documentarians, and I feel like we've talked to quite a few, and they always have an interesting take on the work, you know, because regular narrative film is kind of codified. I mean, there's any number of ways to do it, I guess, but it's like the way it's scheduled, the way it's shot, it's all generally kind of pro forma. But documentary can just be, it's such an imaginative, creative landscape to play in. And these guys are doing work that I don't think anyone else is doing work exactly like this. The only thing I could compare it to, and I say this in the interview, is Errol Morris's early films like Gates of Heaven.
And you know, you're absolutely right. Documentaries, and I'm really, really pleased and proud that we've had so many great documentarians on the show to talk about their work. The rules are kind of unwritten. Never before have so many different disciplines all kind of fed into the cinemagraphia of what it is that you're seeing, you know, how everything plays together. And editing, of course, a big part of that. But, you know, with the documentary or the unscripted narrative that's intrinsic to documentary, you never know what you're going to get. You might get animation, you might get file footage, you might get, you know, found footage, you might get any number of like computer graphics, all of this stuff plays into it.
Reenactments, these guys do lots of reenactments in their work. Recrees, as they call them in the business.
That's right.
But
you've done some recrees for information discovery, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, for investigation discovery, I think you mean.
Oh, excuse me. You're right. Investigation discovery.
Yes, I shot a lot of reenactments for a show called Murder Among Friends.
Because, you know, if you're going to commit murder.
That's the whole premise. It's people who killed their friends. That's the whole show. Spoiler alert.
Not that close, these friends. More frenemies than actual friends.
Yeah, I directed a bunch of reenactments that were shot by an amazing DP, Davey Robertson, who I've threatened to bring on the show before. He's
let's do it. No,
I've never worked with anyone who worked so goddamn fast as Davey. Holy crap. Yeah, ordinarily when you set up a scene, you know, it's like, okay, well, you know, that's the blocking and whatever, you know, let me know when you're there. I'm going to go to Crafty and take a nap.
He's already shot.
No, well, like that's what happened. I would take like 2 steps towards Crafty and they'd be like, Davey's calling for you on the set. And it would look awesome. Like it wasn't that he was phoning it in. This guy didn't phone it in. He did great work.
He had one of those like time turners, like out of like what, Harry Potter. He was somehow able to like, you know, speed up the harvest. You know, this guy.
And his crew, man, they were just so dialed in. And
all right. I'm excited. I want to talk to
some
Davey.
of that footage is on my reel. Like I'm really, I'll reach out to Davey. I've talked to him before. He's also a big horror fan and he's made some H.P. Lovecraft movies. But let's go ahead and dive into our close focus, which is that there was kind of an upset recently at the upfronts.
And let's define the upfronts for our listeners who may not be familiar with that term.
Well, it's when the networks and now streamers are included in that basically trot out their new product to entice advertisers. And over the years, it's become more and more of like a dog and pony show, honestly, where now you've got Kevin Feige and Samuel L. Jackson and all kinds of, Stevie Wonder, all kinds of people doing a little dance for you to try and get advertising dollars. But this year was especially interesting because we might be really looking back on this year as the year that streaming kind of almost went in the direction of commercial television, in that a lot of the streamers, the big ones, are rolling out an advertisement supported tier. And when I say all of them, it's like Netflix, who has never had advertisement, Disney Plus. There's a bunch on here. There's an article in Variety that was written by Tyler. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. Tyler Aquilina. And they're kind of breaking down like what percentage of people are streaming now. Like, linear television, as it's called, still holds sway. 70%. That's a lot. But the fact that streaming now accounts for a third of all, that's crazy.
And the money in advertising is huge. It is billions and billions and billions. I'm starting to sound like Carl Sagan now with all these billions, but it's billions of dollars. It's huge, huge money. And all these streaming services, they want, I think they've realized there's only so many customers you can chase. There's only so many people who can subscribe to your service. But advertising, that's another way to bring money in.
And there's often kind of the third path, which is like a less expensive streaming experience that is ad supported. And, like Hulu has had that and Amazon has had that. Well, actually, Amazon has just had ad supported movies for a while. And TV shows on Amazon Prime. Netflix is kind of a new one. I mean, like the list here in this article is Disney Plus, Hulu, Netflix, Amazon, Tubi, which Tubi is already ad supported. HBO Max is gonna
really. I can't imagine HBO, because HBO has been like, that's why you paid the money, is to not have those commercials.
Yeah, so now it's going to be $15 a month to not have commercials, $9.99 a month with commercials.
Oh, I see. So they made it cheaper. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So what they're doing, it's kind of smart. Like, when a lot of us, I think, are starting to balk at how many streaming services
there are.
that we're subscribed to, and there are ones like Peacock and Paramount Plus that always had some degree of that. And YouTube is the opposite. They've been free with only ads since they existed, and there is a YouTube TV. There are paid tiers of YouTube. They tried YouTube Red a few years ago, and that did not make the cut.
Catch on.
Yeah, but anyway, I think that we can all look forward to our beloved streaming services more and more just looking like regular old television. And we're not on a DVR, so we can't cache this stuff and skip the commercials anymore. Someone's going to figure out how to do that.
It's really interesting. Maybe commercial terrestrial linear television is going to make a big comeback. Just wait and see. Maybe.
I somehow doubt it, and it's such a cost thing.
Let me just throw this out there. Commercial streaming television could be sending data, not just pictures. So they literally could be just like downloading content that your box was constantly catching, and then you could watch it and skip the commercials. Now, it could do that. They don't do that.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. I mean, there's a lot that all of these people can do. But yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how how this washes out. Like if we get to a point where having the commercial-free version of your favorite streaming service prices you out. Would I pay less for Netflix and put up with a commercial here and there? Like the ones on Amazon Prime and Hulu are not onerous. I think I'd be okay with that.
I think it might depend on whether or not your show's being interrupted in the middle. I think that non-skipping mid-roll commercials might be the most egregious. The pre-rolls, the post-rolls, I think that those are less annoying to the average consumer, but those ones that appear just right in the middle at the climax, those are the worst.
And you bring up a really interesting point, by the way, that I had not thought of, which is that like network television, like an hour-long series is broken out into, I believe, 5 acts in general, and they're built around where the commercial breaks are going to land. But if you're watching, say, Ozark, which our previous guest shoots, Ozark is not designed, it is not built, there are not breaks for commercials, so it would just be an interruption unless they did, like Hulu, generally it's like at the beginning and at the end. Sometimes you might get a middle one. But like we've all had the experience where you're watching a YouTube video and it just feels arbitrary where the commercials, like, you know, you're in the middle, you just want to watch the goddamn Corridor Crew video, and not that this happened to me yesterday, but you know,
But
just
it totally did.
in a seemingly random place, because they're not like building it around where the commercials are, I don't believe. It's just like, boom, I gotta watch this stupid Airbnb commercial with the creepy music that I keep seeing on YouTube all the time. I don't know if everyone's getting that.
No, I'm just getting, mayoral race for Los Angeles.
Ooh, yeah, I'm done with those. No, there's this one Airbnb commercial that they keep running, and it has the creepiest music, and I'm like, this got through the focus group? Like, nobody said, hey, what if you didn't have music that sounded like Leatherface was at my Airbnb? Anyway.
Well, here's the thing. They're calling, at least here's the latest nickname. You know, there's traditional linear television. That's what we're all used to. The cable networks and the broadcast.
That's old school. That's
linear. Now
Yeah.
they're calling streaming television CTV. And
what does that stand for?
It stands for connected television. So connected television, this is like this, you've got a smart TV, which a lot of people do. You have a remote, and now you can, plug in your Ethernet cable or hook up to your Wi-Fi, and voila, here's all these new apps and channels and things that you can get. So CTV revenue. And the television manufacturers, they're also talking about adding advertising, not just the various apps and the streaming services, but the actual television set themselves are talking about intelligently inserting their own commercials over sort of standard terrestrial television or even on top of streaming programs. So there's a whole other level of stuff that's being bandied about right now, which is, I don't know how that's going to end up. But, one of the TV manufacturers got in big trouble a few years ago and had to apologize and pay out some money because they were actually recording every single frame that went across that television set and sending the data back to the manufacturer's databases so they could then better market to those customers with additional ads. But of course, that became like a whole privacy thing. It was identifying not just what came through streaming services or broadcast, it was identifying every DVD and thing that was played, including sending screenshots, which is like, and people don't really talk about it very much, but it was Vizio. You can Google this. Vizio got in big trouble for this. So
every DVD?
Every DVD. It was constantly like, supposedly they've now forced
and you
firmware
as a
updates.
loyal Netflix DVD subscriber, that would get you in real trouble.
Well, not really. I'm a pretty open book. People are going to be like, you watch that crap? Okay, great. Anyway, so Ben, hey, let's get to the interview.
Let's do it.
The Cinematography Podcast interview.
So I'm here talking with James Lee Hernandez and Brian Lazarte, the co-directors of The Big Con, which is on Apple TV Plus right now. You should go check it out right now. Thanks so much for coming on the show, guys.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having us here.
Although you say right now to go check it out, but you should at least listen to this podcast and then go.
Either way.
Okay.
Whichever works.
There you go. Pause this, go watch it, and then come back.
Yeah.
So, first up, we've talked to a lot of directors on the show over the years, but I don't know that we've talked to co-directors. And it's a skill that I find deeply mysterious as someone who has directed myself, how you go about splitting up that job and how you make sure that, if one director wants to do one thing, it's not stepping on the other person's toes or whatever. How do you go about creating, because this isn't the first project of this scope and scale that you've done together as co-directors. How do you go about making co-directing work?
This is James. The way that we go about making that work is mainly just fist fights. But
Good.
Outside of that, then it's a lot of Rochambeau. The way we do it is with McMillions and the same thing with The Big Con. They're these huge sprawling stories. And it really helps to have an institutional knowledge of all of it. It helps to have somebody else there that has that same amount of knowledge. So we just look at it almost like it's a writer's room. We tackle the whole thing together and are very collaborative about how we go about it. We're very lucky to have a great team that we work with here at Fun Meter, and everyone else is involved. And it really comes down to the best idea wins, and everybody sort of knows what the best idea is going to be. And we just don't have an ego about it and aren't precious, and just try to make it the best we can.
For our listeners who haven't seen The Big Con, give us the pitch. What's the pitch? Because it's such a colorful, weird-ass story with so many twists.
Well, The Big Con is like, if you imagine a real life Saul Goodman story. It's about this larger than life attorney based out of Eastern Kentucky who pulled off the largest Social Security fraud scam in history, over $550 million. He had judges on his payroll, he had doctors on his payroll, and he got away with it for over 10 years. And once he finally got busted in true Hollywood fashion, he goes on the run. And it's a wild story. There's a lot of surprises. It's comical, but equally tragic.
Well, yeah, certainly tragic for many of the people in it. And it's something there's a lot of great tape to go through that you guys have, like a lot of great archives, but also you guys created some interesting reenactments, if you will. Before we even talk about doing the reenactments themselves, when you're tackling a documentary project, there's sort of that language of documentary, which is interview, archive, reenactments. And, there's more than that, but those are like the main things. And reenactments can take any form or shape, but also it's completely legitimate not to use reenactments. So what was the discussion, if there was a discussion, about how and when to use these various pieces of film language to create the story?
The way that we go about that stuff is we look at the story as a whole, and then we start to do research and see what footage exists, what archival exists, what access we can get to characters. But we very much quickly get to a point where we start learning about these amazing stories, but there isn't footage of it. It's not like they started, unfortunately, recording everything that happened in Eric C. Kahn's law office or everything that happened in the Social Security office. But the stories are so rich, the storytellers are so good, and it's so important to the overall thing that we want to put you there in the moment. And so that's when we really start to get into the world of recreation, and we map out the entire series first. We literally cut the entire 4-part doc. We put storyboards in places where Recre is going to be. And then in the midst of doing a 4-part documentary series, we stop down and go make basically a feature film for a few months. And then we come back and put all that together.
Is there ever a discussion of like, what if we were to tell the story without them? Or is it just driven by whatever the story is and whatever the background info, background footage you have is?
No, this is Brian. Sorry, I missed it the first time.
You failed, Brian.
I did fail. I failed out of the gate. The intention for the Big Con was always to utilize recreations to help tell the story. And similarly, when we were developing McMillions and we took McMillions out, that was the idea from the get-go. This art form of documentary filmmaking and utilizing recreations in documentary filmmaking has felt like it's continued to be elevated over the recent years. And it's a style and format that really has resonated with us. I think James and I both approach things so cinematically, and we think about it like a feature film, or even though we're in the documentary world, like the way that we envision some of these key stories, we like to include everything. We like to include the archival. We like to include great beauty shots and visuals to take you there, or just stay on an interview for a long period of time. But some of these stories just warranted and need to help transport you to that moment.
Now, both of your series, McMillions and this, have, I would say, they're not the same tone, but they have a similar tone in that there's, they're true crime stories, and there's a real sense of humor about them. Like there's a real wit in the way that the two of you are putting the stories together. I guess this is a chicken and egg question. Are you looking for stories? Are you turned on by stories where there's like kind of a central crazy irony like both of these stories have? They're both stories of big scams and of kind of, shall we say, colorful people getting away with a lot of stuff. Are those the stories that are turning you on? And how much, I guess the real question is like, how much tone are you consciously imbuing the projects with?
Well, this is James here again, and I've got the answer. For us, with McMillions, you look at the story, and as we started to meet the people that were part of it, it just had that little thread of comedy to it. It felt like when we first pitched this HBO, McMillions, it was like, okay, this is a true crime doc. It spans all these years. All these people got arrested, and it's going to be funny. And that was a really hard thing for them to wrap their heads around. And the only example we had, because when they asked, like, what doc is it like? it's not like a doc. It's like a Coen Brothers movie. That was the only thing that we could really say. And with the Big Con, we were really fortunate in finding the story, and really underneath everything, the Big Con is a very serious, it shows a very serious problem with Social Security. It shows a very serious problem we have within our government and a massive flaw that needs to be fixed. But if we just sat here and tried to explain to you how Social Security works, you'd fall asleep and or pass out from boredom halfway through. So to find the character like Eric Kahn and Peter King, who we worked with on McMillions and is an executive producer on The Big Con, he brought us the story, and it just, the idea that there was this crazy attorney that stole $500 million and would gallivant around the world and live larger than life and all of that, and then also be able to say something very serious about this humanitarian crisis that's happening in his area with the people that lost their benefits. That, you know, that balance is really what we look for. We look for that left to center, stranger than fiction, comedic way to kind of lure you into something serious and then start to gradually get into the serious portion of why this all exists.
Yeah, like I kind of find myself asking, like, is there a serious version of this story? Because it's just so outlandish and crazy, and you've got the guy, you know, hanging out with porn stars and stuff, and it's just like, no matter how you slice it. And when you talk about McMillions, I will tell you that when I saw it, it reminded me a little bit of Errol Morris's Gates of Heaven. Like there was something about the people in that, something about the way you two chose to reveal character with people kind of reminded me a little bit of that. Now, like, who are, like, in the documentary world, who are your heroes? Where's your true north?
Oh boy. I mean, there's so many phenomenal documentary filmmakers out there. I don't know if we necessarily have said, like, hey, this is the documentary filmmaker we want to aspire to become. Honestly, like, fell into documentary by accident, personally. I wanted to make scripted projects and was an editor for many years. And early in my career, I had cut something and someone was looking for an editor and was saying, hey, I know someone who can help you cut your documentary, and was just always excited by story. And it was such a freeing way of telling story. And this was, you know, almost 16, 17 years ago, when pre-Netflix and better budgets for documentary projects. And then probably the most recent film that really just moved me was actually Won't You Be My Neighbor?
Oh yeah, that's a great film.
And I think just the power of that film, I cried like 20 times in that movie. And I was actually speaking with the editor about it, and we got into this long discussion about how there's not really anything sad in the movie, but yet I was so emotionally moved. And it really struck me that one of the things that made it so powerful was the kindness of Fred Rogers. And that kindness can be more powerful than sadness in moving an audience. And it was something that really kind of like struck me in a way that I hadn't really thought about storytelling and the power of cinema. And now, to answer your question about, like, we haven't really thought about it like that. I think we have a great deal of respect for a lot of seasoned documentary filmmakers. Steve James, Hoop Dreams, you know, early on, Stevie, phenomenal filmmaker. Ken Burns, I mean, this genius, you know, Davis Guggenheim, who I had a pleasure of working with also a few years ago, and Morgan Neville, of course. And I think there's just so many voices out there that are telling great stories, and we feel honored and privileged to be in a position that people are into our take. And because, you know, we are approaching it from a standpoint of how can we do this a little bit differently? How can we bring a sense of humor and levity to a story that has a lot of moral undertones to it as well?
No, that's really interesting. Well, and I feel like the last several years have kind of freed documentary up in an interesting way to be more like narrative films in so many ways, using so many of the techniques, the kinds of techniques that you two use as well. Also, let's talk about sort of you know, the longer length. Were there ever times where you were conceiving these things as standalone movies, or was the idea always to make them longer form?
I'm so glad I get to answer this question.
All right. Is it a hack question? Does everyone ask you that question?
No, actually, this is literally the battle that Brian and I have all the time. Brian always thinks everything should be a movie, and I always think it should be multi-part. And We have this, whenever anybody pitches us an idea, there's this conversation invariably does happen. But we're really fortunate in the time that we are. I mean, one, not every story calls for doing a series. We've all seen series that probably shouldn't have been a series, and I'm sure there are people for both McMillions and The Big Con that are like, nah, this could have been like 90 minutes. But for what we want to do, and for how you have to understand the story, and more than anything, the motivations. Like, what this allows us to do is we have to dive deeper into the psyche and motivations of how and why people make decisions to get themselves in the places that they are. And in 90 minutes to 2 hours, you can't really do that. You just got to hit the hot point facts, and that's the end of it. But with this, we have the time to understand why Eric C. Kahn's relationship with his mother is what leads him to having so many wives and gallivanting around the world. You know, the fact that Sarah and Jennifer, who are the whistleblowers in this whole thing, and their motivations on why they stood up to the Social Security Administration only for the sake of doing what's right, and not just because they thought it was going to impact them financially positively. Like, they actually were worse off by standing up for themselves. And so to be able to have that time is something that we just have been very fortunate. Like, when we first pitched McMillions, there was maybe, as far as popular doc series, it was Making a Murderer was huge, The Jinx, Wild Wild Country, but usually it really wasn't done. And we were one of the first series that HBO really dove into and greenlit from scratch. And again, not every story requires it, but we like to be able to take the time to dive in, to let the characters be interesting, let them be funny, and also then be on this emotional roller coaster with them when things get very serious.
The number of characters also plays a huge role in making that decision, because if you only have a few key storytellers for your project, for your movie, it services probably a 90-minute movie a little bit more. But when you have, like in our case with The Big Con, there's not only so many characters, but they live in different worlds, and they have their unique points of view. And when you really take the time to understand their point of view and what they were going through, then you flip it and you get to understand someone else's point of view that lives in a completely different part of that story. You get to piece it together in your head in a way that it feels like it's richer storytelling, at least in our opinion. And for The Big Con, it's very much, it's a 4-hour documentary. It takes you on a journey. Each episode has a different feel, has a different vibe, especially when you get to episode 3, it really turns, it changes. And there's it's a different way of storytelling and consuming. We're even doing a companion podcast to the documentary series because we felt like, in our case with The Big Con, there was just so much story we couldn't fit into the documentary series.
And I'm ashamed to say I didn't know that there was a podcast, and now I'm going to subscribe to it. I think that podcasting is kind of blown out the documentary form in another way. There's so many amazing documentary podcasts out there. I can't wait to hear that. Let's talk a little bit about cinematography. And your DP on McMillions and this was Jeff Dolan, correct?
Correct.
So how do you go about working with him? Is he doing all the interviews and all the reenactments? How do you split it up? Some of the documentary filmmakers we've talked to, they'll have a different person do the reenactments, or they'll have a different person do the interviews.
We're really, really lucky to be able to work with Jeff Dolan. I mean, we've had other people like in McMillions, a great guy by the name of Kenny Stoff helped us out. We also had Rod Hassler, also helped us. But the main person behind all of it is Jeff. And on The Big Con, Jeff did every single thing. And
oh, really?
Yes. So Jeff is a very, very rare talent. Usually you have somebody that's great at verite or great at interviews, but they're not good at just the general cinematic feel that you need for scripted stuff, for the recreation piece. And Jeff can do it all. I mean, we've been in situations where it was just the three of us, Jeff and a sound person, and he's throwing a camera on his shoulder and popping off great verite shots. Sit-down interviews look absolutely beautiful, where in The Big Con, we're going everywhere from double-wide trailers to outdoor shots to literally this United States Senate and trying to make this massive space just feel so warm and inviting. And Jeff he's able to do all of that. He's got a phenomenal eye for lighting. And then we dive really deep into them with testing everything as far as lenses are concerned before we even go in with a shoot. For this, for the Big Con and for Apple TV Plus, it has to be 4K. So we couldn't use Alexa. We had to figure out, all right, well, what are we going to use? What new camera are we going to use that's really interesting? And ended up settling on the Sony Venice because it still gave that warm sensor feel that we like. And he's just a magician. Then we get out there and we're shooting the recreations, and he's running a set the same. I don't want to give him too big of an ego, but Roger Deakins ish, where he just really understands how to make things look that give it beautiful lighting, give it beautiful depth. And a lot of times people bring a separate cinematographer for the cinematography on the recre, but with Jeff, it's plug and play. He does both of those, and it's great because he understands all of it. It all feels like it's one world because it wasn't a totally separate person that did all of that. So the lighting matches. Even with our production designer, we talked to her ahead of time to make sure interviews and the coloring and everything is going to match what we're going to be doing for the recreations. So it's all feels like one cohesive piece.
He's kind of like the quiet assassin.
Very quiet, very quiet assassin.
And he's been an invaluable part of our team, and he makes phenomenal baked goods that he brings to set every day, which is also the most...
Oh, unreal. I don't know how he finds the time, but he'll show up with like a whole thing of delicious
you just got him hired.
Snickerdoodles.
Any producer listening to us is gonna hire him because dude brings baked goods to the set.
It's fascinating, and he also likes to drive. So anytime we go out on interviews, he has to be the driver. He's really the full package.
Yeah.
He's got the skills, that's for sure.
When you're doing an interview, how do you choose? And is this like a discussion that happens in pre-production when you're preparing it, or is it something that's more on the day? How do you choose like the style of the way you're going to film the interviews? Because again, I feel like we've had an explosion in just the way we approach interviews when we see them in documentaries. It used to be kind of a stock standard guy sitting in a chair looking right off to the camera, and probably as a filmmaker you'd be like, okay, I had 6 people looking to the left of the camera, so now I got to have the other 6 looking to the right of the camera, whatever it is. But you guys in this film kind of mix up the styles a little bit. Like, it looks like you've chosen an interview style based on the character of the person you're interviewing them, as opposed to having a fixed style like in an Errol Morrissey kind of a way where it's like everyone's on Interrotron in his thing. But you got there's a wide variety. How do you approach coming up with that?
Well, no, it's funny because when we made McMillions, we had a very specific lookbook for how to approach it, and all of our images were actually from scripted movies, and how we wanted to go about lighting, how we wanted to go about composing. We were a bit looser on the Big Con, in part because we were shooting this in the height of the pandemic. We hadn't really heard of that many productions happening at the time that we were going out and shooting. Most of the industry that we were being exposed to were shut down. And so it was the first thing that we had gone out and done. Any of our crew were like, yeah, we haven't done anything. And so there was a sense of just being cautious, but we 100% looked at it as like the character will dictate how we're going to go about shooting that interview, and their environment will dictate how we're going to go about shooting that interview. We shot on these Leica lenses that are actually still camera lenses that have been modified. And one of the reasons we did that, I think, because they looked great for one, but we had these Cooke lenses on McMillions that were just a pain in the ass to lug around.
We used the Cooke S4s on McMillions, and they're so huge.
Didn't we have the S7s? We
had the S7s for the first big shoot that we did, and then the rest of it was the S4s, and they're beautiful, but they're gargantuan.
Yeah. And we were like, let's make our lives a little bit easier, and like these Leicas looked really nice. We just felt like we could move quicker, especially being such a small footprint when we went and did the interview portion. The more that we can just kind of get in and out and not have to be bogged down by that stuff.
We're always searching for the smallest footprint that we can get up and running really quickly, but still have everything high quality. We're always trying to dial that in.
So, you guys said that you do extensive prep before you start, but I'm still assuming that you conduct the interviews first, kind of string that out, figure out what you need to reenact, and then schedule the reenactments after that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Sorry, there's literally a peacock right outside my window, and it is screeching. I don't know if you hear it. It's on my next door neighbor's roof.
That's hilarious.
So for myself, but also for people who haven't gone through this process before, what's the time offset? How long do you give yourselves to string out enough to know what you're going to need reenactments for? And then talk about like how long you had to do all the reenactments.
I mean, we've heard people do it different ways, but for us, we divide our edit weeks based on how we put together a schedule. And we say, okay, the first half of the edit weeks are all about story building in the documentary sense. And we'll have black holes, we'll have title cards, and then we'll just really map, and we'll do it with music, temp music, whatever we need to kind of start to establish what the tone and the pace and the vibe of that episode and that story is going to be. And then once we get closer to the finish of that sort of like first and like rough cut phase, then we start getting in with a storyboard artist. And it's kind of our first stage for James and I to really think about how to be efficient with our shots and creatively, what do we want to see in this moment? Some things are more obvious than others, but we start to really map out what that's going to look and feel like. And then we'll actually put it into a final draft script format so that that can be translated essentially to all department heads. You know, when you have wardrobe and makeup and, you know, from a DP and your first AD to scheduling out how you're going to do that recreation, like you really, every single scene has to be identified and numbered, especially doing it in this format, right? In this style. Like if we had just like a couple small recreations, we could probably just write it out a little bit differently. But in this case, it really helps us to maximize our days. And then we did for both McMillions and for the Big Con, we're kind of the same schedule that we had, which was about 15 to 18 days.
Oh, not bad.
And, you know, they're packed. They're definitely.
Oh, yeah. They were dense. Sometimes Brian and I will divide and conquer on recre days, and one day our sides, somebody was said, "Is that the whole script?" Like, oh no, that's just what we're shooting today.
I mean, we do keep we kept it under 12 hours.
Oh yeah,
which is, you know, very key for us whenever we're going out and doing these things. But yeah, I mean,
humane.
And then yeah, you got to stay humane and keep people happy.
This may be me reading way too much into it, but since you said you bring in a storyboard artist, do you drop those boards into your edit so that you know almost to the half second how long you need the shots to be?
I don't know about half second, but yeah, we actually drop them in because nobody is going to understand what we mean just by text over black, especially when you're dealing with networks. You know, network executives, they're smart and they have great notes and all of that, but they don't know what's in our mind. So we need to show everybody the general idea of what we're going to be filming when we go out and shoot.
But you got to remember, there's also the second half of our edit plan when we go about doing these things, because this is not like a commercial where you got to stop watch and you could say like, okay, it's got to fit this tiny little timeline. As soon as you come back after we film those recreations, it's not an edit by numbers situation. You don't just take that scene that we shot and just like plug it into like what that storyboard was. There's still a lot of shaping that still happens after that. And in some cases, the reason why that happens is we don't shoot exactly what our storyboard is, or we run out of time and we have to come up with something quick and dirty to make sure that we can get that story beat across. And sometimes it can be better than what we imagined for the storyboard. But the art of the documentary is just, it's such a moving object that you're trying to figure out and crack to the very end. And we're always elevating the story. We're always discovering new sound bites and new story paths. And when you have those recreations, it just changes how they feel over time.
Cool. Well, before we wrap up, do you already have your next project lined up? Are you already working on the next thing? Or are you?
Yeah, we're currently working on a few things. We're very fortunate that there are things that we're producing just through our company Fun Meter that we're not directing. There's a thing or two that we're directing, and we're cranking away on one of them, and hopefully it'll be out this year.
Yeah. Yes, we have our next project. Not to be too cryptic about it or when it comes out, but we're always looking for great stories.
Always looking. If you got something great
and great
come
collaborators.
on down to Fun Meter.
All right, I'm walking over. I'll see you in a minute.
Sounds good.
Before we go, obviously, McMillions is on HBO Max, and The Big Con is on Apple TV Plus. Do you have a website or something where people can find you, interact with you, or are you on Instagram, Twitter, any places you'd like people to go look to find both of you guys?
Yeah, so FunMeter, our website is funmetermedia.com. You can find us on Instagram, FunMeter Official. You can find me on Instagram. I am the JLH, or on Twitter. Just put in my whole name. Not a lot of James Lee Hernandez's on the planet. Brian, I think, has stuff too.
I have to look mine up. That's how untech I am. Because
I think yours is BD Lazarte. Is that?
Oh, it might be. Yep, BD Lazarte. D is in
Doberman.
Yeah,
but we're if you have something cool, hit us up there, and it just keeps you posted. We've got a lot coming around the rest of the year, so we're excited for people to see this. And we've had such an awesome experience working with Apple TV Plus and Molly and Rose and Erica and Zach, Jamie, that whole team, Kyle on the podcasting side, and we're excited to show people more of what we got.
The companion podcast has also been a huge. I mean, we're still in it right now. That's why we even have mics available, because
our audience can't see it, but you both have very slick podcasty looking mics.
That's actually what we Googled. And then boom, here they are.
But yeah, no, we're deep in getting this off the ground. Each episode, since the launch of the series, a new podcast episode has been coming out each week, and will so for the 6 weeks. But it's treated like a narrative. Like the way that we handle the companion is an extension of the documentary series, but there's a narrative thread to it as well. And it doesn't retell the story that we're telling in the documentary series, but there's new characters that we didn't interview for the series that are here in the podcast. So we have a few different perspectives and voices to bring the story to life. And then we build off of things that we talk about in the episode. So we're really excited. It's been a lot of work. We've had an incredible team of producers that have been working with us, who are also from Kentucky, actually. And it's different. I don't think we can draw a comparison to another documentary series that has sort of tackled a companion like this. And yeah, we're really proud with how it's been turning out.
So anyone listening to this, definitely check out the series, but also check out the podcast. You're listening to a podcast right now, so it'll take you no time at all to do that. So guys, thank you so much for coming on the show. Very excited. Really loved your series, and I can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
All right, so that was James Lee Hernandez and Brian Lazarte with Big Con. And if everybody who has Apple TV Plus, give it a shot. And I don't mean to toot my own horn here too much, but I brought it to their attention. I brought it to their attention that cinematographer Jeff Dolan was not credited on IMDb. I actually because I didn't take fast notes when the credits were rolling, because the screen comes up and tells you can advance or whatever. I didn't notice who it was, and I was like, I'll look it up on IMDb, which I always do, and it wasn't on there. So I actually had to do some research, like I'm in high school, to figure out who shot it. And as you heard in the interview, man, they love Jeff Dolan, and apparently he bakes baked goods after shoots and brings them to the set the next day. And I'm like, you just got that guy hired on everything. Oh my God.
That's right. When he goes home, he's baking. That's incredible.
He gets done shooting, goes home and makes a bunch of cookies and brings them in for the crew the next day.
I would expect that from some of our other guests, like Kian Tran, because she does also co-run the directors of photography. But maybe it's this trend that I wasn't aware of DP cinematographers in baking.
And the show does look amazing. So kudos to everyone.
All right, Ben, you know what time it is?
What time would that be?
Time to pay the bills. We got to thank our fine sponsor of the show, Aputure maker of LED lighting equipment. They have a new light called the LS600C. It just premiered at NAB a few weeks back in April. And it is similar to their other 600 lights. They also have a 600D and a 600X. The D is just daylight. The X is both daylight and tungsten. The C is a full color RGB WW, so 5 colors, red, green, blue, They got the warm white of tungsten and the cool white of daylight. And you can blend all of those different LEDs together in order to make all the colors of the rainbow. And it's a really interesting looking light. It's coming in at a pretty aggressive price point. Of course, you can get it over at Hot Rod Cameras. It's a pre-order right now. It's not shipping just yet, but it's a pretty exciting new light, and it's totally worth taking a look at.
What is that price point, if I may ask?
The pre-order price is $2,490. And now some people out there who are looking at Amazon and going, but look, I can get this RGB light for $30 from the, No Name Express. No Name Express company that they're selling it for $30. There's a huge difference between No Name Express and Aperture. In fact, any sort of maker of quality equipment, they're going to give you way more power, way more accuracy, and way more usability for professionals. And a lot of people out there, I think they're not necessarily knowing about all those different things, but the ability to have your light finely tuned in both brightness and in color, and then also program effects as well as power it via batteries, and can communicate wirelessly via either apps or by industry standard protocols like DMX, CRMX, and all that sort of thing. So it really is an incredible light. And if you're doing YouTube level production, professional level production, corporate video level production, the Aperture 600C could fit in very nicely to all of those scenarios. Worth taking a look at. Find it over at hotradcameras.com.
I was pretty impressed when I was doing that shoot a few months ago with Bill Totolo. One of his big guns that he used was a 600D. Yeah, I mean, like that was his big gun, and the end product looked amazing. Now, I mean, the end product looked amazing because Bill Totolo knows how to fucking light. But it was great to see Aperture lights in action out there.
I hope he puts that on his business card. Bill Totolo knows how to fucking light.
Knows how to fucking light.
Ben Rock.
No, I mean
it's a ringing endorsement. Yeah,
we got a lot of compliments from the client on it, and the project is up. I don't know. We could add it in the show notes if we want. Okay, cool. It's an industrial video for Halil at UCLA.
Nice.
And now, short ends.
So Ben, I think it's our famed short end time of the show. What is your obsession this week?
So my short end is currently on HBO Max. It's a 2-part documentary, and it is called George Carlin's American Dream. And if you were a fan of George Carlin's, it's amazing. And I have been a lifelong fan of George Carlin's. I believe if you had never even heard of George Carlin before watching this, it will blow your mind. It was directed by Judd Apatow and Michael Bonfiglio. And it's my favorite thing Judd Apatow has ever directed. It's really incisive. It's really moving. It's very warts and all for people who are not, because George Carlin passed away in 2008. So for younger listeners, maybe haven't even heard of him. But he was a stand-up comedian who was very active starting in the 1960s. And he, again, died in 2008, made numerous TV specials. And he's one of those comedians who you still see his stuff, people passing around as memes and stuff like that to this day, because the stuff he was saying, especially in like maybe the last 15, 20 years of his life, is so shockingly universal that it resonates through today. But even stuff he said in the 80s, whatever. But it's interesting on many fronts because it's very personal. They have his daughter on there a lot, Kelly Carlin. I think she's one of the executive producers. And she talks openly about her father and mother's drug addictions and how her father was on the road so much. And, her mother was kind of stuck at home and lonely and bored a lot. You find out about his health issues, his multiple heart attacks, all of that kind of stuff. And then you kind of find out about, and this to me is maybe one of the most interesting things about it, is what really drove him, because he was creative, but he would reinvent himself. So he started as kind of a very straight-laced stand-up comic. There's archival footage of him from the 60s, and it's him on a show with an extraordinarily young Richard Pryor, and they're kind of bantering off each other. I didn't realize that their friendship went back that far. And then he reinvents himself as a counterculture figure in the 60s and early 70s through the 70s. And then in a similar way to the Kurt Vonnegut documentary that I talked about recently, it's like in the mid to late 70s, the culture was kind of done with the hippie culture and the counterculture, and he became sort of emblematic of that. Dude reinvents himself again, and he just kept doing it over and over and over again. And by the end of his life, you know, like you watch his stand up, and you know, I'm not casting aspersions on anyone, but he is doing stand up comedy at a level that you just don't see. Like what he's doing is just, it's brilliant writing, it's brilliant wordplay, and you know, they interview a rogues gallery of just some amazing comedians, and it's interesting to see like what stuff, you know, like Jerry Seinfeld fixes on his album A Place for My Stuff, which is probably the most Seinfeldian thing George Carlin ever did, you know. But you know, you've got Patton Oswalt on there, you've got Bill Burr. It's just so good. It's 4 hours, and the other night I was like, I think I'll watch the first part. I'll see how I feel about it, and maybe I'll come back the next day. And I watched all 4 hours in a row. I couldn't stop watching it. It was just, and it's gorgeous, by the way. It looks amazing.
I got nothing to add to that. I loved it as well. I've been watching it the last couple of nights. It's been really, really great.
And I will add one thing: cinematography by Matt Bass. So congratulations, Matt Bass.
You mentioned wordplay. I mean, George Carlin really is the comedian of semantics. And not to say that other comedians are not, but you know, when he gets into like the very basic, but also still very humorous double innuendos, double entendres of the you can prick your finger, but you can't say on television, finger your prick. So,
they go in deep on the 7 dirty words you can't say on television, which I never really understood the origin of that bit, but it was like George Carlin kept getting in trouble for using bad language, but he couldn't get anyone to tell him what the words were. So that bit comes out of him figuring out what the words that he couldn't say were. And I can say them here, who cares, but I won't.
But I think what's great is you get to see the reinvention, because there's a couple of points in his career where it's like, you think it's just going to go off the rails. You think he's going to become obsolete. You think that, you know, really people aren't going to be interested in him anymore. But instead what happens is he goes, oh, okay, well, you think you're done with me? I'm going to raise my game. I'm going to figure out how to come back even stronger, even better, more relevant. And that to me is some of the most inspiring, best stuff. And talking about a documentary series that is made in the edit for that show is incredible.
It's so well edited.
It's
so well the graphic design of it is just so well done. You know, I guess he wrote these little notes to himself on little scraps of paper, and they use those as kind of a recurring motif through the whole thing. There are many like just really well put together sequences. And yeah, like what you're saying, I feel like almost every comedian, even outrageously famous comedians, kind of fade. Like they're not as relevant. Their humor isn't as cutting edge in its time. And, you know, most of those people are able to make a living throughout their life doing stand-up touring or doing specials or whatever. Like I remember even towards the end, Robin Williams had a new stand-up special. But George Carlin, man, his specials just came back in a way they just kept coming back edgier and edgier and angrier, you know, and it's like, you know, you look at a comic like Lewis Black, who is an angry comic, like his stage persona is angry.
His whole thing is about being angry.
Yeah. Or Eddie Pepitone, people like that. Like those guys don't hold a candle to what was coming out of Carlin, to the point where I feel like sometimes it was hard to find the laugh in it, but it was like really, really cutting through. And again, a lot of it just holds up. He was just a brilliant artist. So definitely check that out. Ilya, what is your short end this week?
So my short end is also a TV series. It's actually one that I discovered during the pandemic and really enjoyed, and it is back for a season 2, and it's called Tehran. And Tehran is all about an Israeli Mossad agent who infiltrates Tehran in Iran. You know, I'm a sucker for the spy thrillers. I really, really like them. And this one is not so much of like, it's a good guys versus bad guys, but it feels really sort of grounded in reality, even though you get the big disclaimer up front that any similarities to people living or dead is purely coincidental. It's a really interesting show with fully formed characters, and while it has some of the tropes of spy thrillers that you go, yeah, sure, okay, that's very convenient, at the same time, it's just fun. It's fun, but it's not fun in a funny sort of way or fun in like a James Bond sort of way. It feels like it is a grounded in reality, biting, dramatic series, and the performances are spectacular. It's absolutely worth watching, and I highly recommend it. And this season, Glenn Close is in it. Like, who would have thought? But Glenn Close is in this series. Have you seen Tehran?
I haven't, and where is it streaming?
You can stream it over on Apple TV Plus. And I have not been a huge proponent of Apple TV Plus, but between Tehran and Severance, they've really had some good stuff lately, and they're getting my $4.99 a month. So
Severance is really good. I still go back to the Beastie Boys documentary that they released.
That was quite good too. I really enjoyed that.
Excellent. So I think that does us for this week. Ilya, where can people find you online?
You can find me over at Hot Rod Cameras, hotrodcameras.com, which, we're doing more and more stuff, incling we're bringing back Cinebeer this year in a very sort of, I know. Can you believe
Are we going to do a live thing?
Alana Cody was asking me the same thing. I don't think so as of this moment, but I literally just sent out the first invitations to manufacturers who help underwrite the whole thing. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. I'm going to say probably not, but I don't know. It's still open. It's really only a few weeks away. So, but I'll keep you posted. Cinebeer is one of the most incredible and best events we do, and I always hear from everyone how much fun they have at it. So yeah, I'll keep you posted.
Well, I hear that people who work in the film industry like beer.
I've never heard that. Yes. Beer's slightly popular. So, but it's not just beer. It's craft beer, but we also do a selection of like gourmet food, and it's a very casual networking experience where you can get demos on some of the latest technology, and we've really sort of curated only very interesting manufacturers to be there. So it is definitely, in the past, it was like 300 people. It's not going to happen this way anymore. And we're going to be a mixture of indoors and outdoors. We're really going to do it right. And I really think it's going to be the best Cinebeer ever.
Well, the only way to make it the best one ever is to have a live interview. But,
All right. Maybe that'll happen. We'll keep working on it.
All right.
So Ben, where can people find you?
You can find me. I'm still kind of reeling from this at benrock.com.
Oh, okay, great. That's where I'll find you then. Benrock.com.
Yeah, find me at benrock.com. You can find all my social media things. Also, the Facebook group Needs a Werewolf. Please come join. Pitch us a movie with a werewolf idea in it somehow. It's sort of just become a werewolf appreciation society. And the interesting thing about social media is you do something like that and, I'm not saying I don't love a good werewolf movie. It was kind of a joke that got carried away, but there are people who come on there and they're like, I can turn you into a wolf, DM me. And I'm like, please go away.
That's scary.
Please go find the group that says I want to be an actual real werewolf, because this isn't it. You've hit the wrong place. You're barking up the wrong tree, as it were.
Wow. That all pun intended.
Howling up the wrong tree. Anyway.
Hey, Ben, let's thank some people. Let's start off by thanking Kay Zalatrachi, who I saw this past week. And he said that he thought it was funny because he heard me talk about the show, how I was going to see him. And then I actually saw him. So that was great. And he says we are going to do his interview sometime soon. I don't know when yet.
Well, and just so Kays can feel like he's living in the Matrix fully, I may be seeing Kays this week because he's doing a pickup shot for a horror thing that he made. And he asked me if I could come over and help him with something. And I don't want to say really what it is. All I want to say is that I pitched him adding an eyeball. It's very important to me, like for me to make my day about going over there, that an eyeball needs to be involved in the gag that we need to shoot. It's just an insert shot. It's like a big creepy scare moment, and I want an eyeball in it. So Kays, if you're listening to this and we haven't done it yet, I want a fucking eyeball. If we have done it, I hope that an eyeball was a part of whatever it was we did.
Yeah, because this is going to be like live tomorrow, so he's totally hearing this. Yeah,
good.
For sure.
He'll be listening to it while he's on Amazon looking for realistic eyeball props, hopefully.
All right. Let's thank Ben Katz.
Let's thank Ben Katz, our intrepid editor in the Pacific Northwest. We miss you, Ben, but thank you so much for making us sound like not idiots.
Yes, not idiots is definitely the goal. All right, well, I think that's just going to be about...
No, we didn't thank Alana Cody, dude.
Oh, crap, you're right. We didn't thank Alana Cody.
Oh, my
Boy,
God.
I'm going to hear about that. So.
She is, like, there is no cinematography podcast. She's our producer. She's our showrunner. She's our omniscient godhead. I'm going to go ahead and just say omniscient godhead.
Omniscient godhead. Great. Don't build her up too high here.
Anyway, we wouldn't be here without her. We're on like year 3 of a new episode every week, I believe.
Yeah.
All thanks to Alana Cody. Oh my God, so many amazing interviews, all because of Alana Cody.
All right. So now let's wrap it up and say, hey, thanks for everyone for listening. And you will hear us next week. Like with certainty, you'll hear us next week.
I don't know who with, but yeah.
That's right.
This has been the Cinematography Podcast, presented by Hot Rod Cameras. Find your next camera, lens, or accessory on the web at hotrodcameras.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our show on iTunes and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening.